There comes a moment in life when you realize something shocking, not that you hurt someone intentionally, but that your truth, your growth, your authenticity exposed them. You didn't set out to destroy anyone. You didn't plan to dismantle their false image. Yet, simply by becoming real, by standing in truth, you stripped someone of the illusion they built their entire identity upon. And that's when power shifts without permission. There's a kind of quiet war that takes place in human relationships, not with weapons, but with perception. People build their influence not always on truth, but on how convincingly they can appear right, powerful, or wise. And then, one day, someone walks in, someone who isn't even trying to compete, someone who doesn't even realize they've stepped onto a battlefield. That person is you. You walked in with nothing but honesty, clarity, and an unshakable desire to see things as they are. And in doing so, you unknowingly became the mirror that shattered their entire illusion. You didn't expose them by shouting. You didn't argue or attack. You simply lived in alignment, and the truth is, truth doesn't need to fight, it only needs to exist. Because when truth appears, lies naturally collapse under their own weight. What was once seen as confidence in them starts to look like manipulation. What once passed as wisdom now sounds rehearsed, and what once looked like leadership begins to reek of insecurity masked as control. You didn't strip them of their power. Their own deception couldn't coexist with your authenticity. They built their throne on perception. You stood on reality. And when the two collided, perception lost. Because people can feel when something is real. There's a resonance to it, a frequency that cuts through the noise of ego. You didn't destroy their credibility. They destroyed it the moment your presence made their facade visible. This is why people sometimes turn bitter, distant, or hostile toward you after your awakening. It's not because you wronged them, it's because your very existence became evidence. Evidence that power can exist without domination, that confidence can exist without arrogance, that dignity can exist without deceit, and that authority can exist without control. You didn't mean to challenge them, but you became a living contradiction to everything they believed power should look like. See, false authority depends on collective blindness. It only works as long as no one dares to look too closely. But once someone does, once someone like you walks in with piercing honesty, the illusion fractures. Because your eyes don't just see, they reveal. You make people aware of what they've been ignoring. And awareness is fatal to manipulation. That's why they felt stripped, not because you took anything from them, but because your clarity removed the fog they once hid behind. They'll tell themselves you're arrogant, disrespectful, or rebellious, but the truth is simpler. You became immune to their game. And people who build their power on games cannot stand those who no longer play. You made them feel powerless, not by force, but by freedom. The kind of freedom that doesn't bow to lies, the kind that refuses to pretend, the kind that makes control impossible. And that's when you begin to understand something deep. Truth carries a destructive beauty. It doesn't destroy people, it destroys pretenses. It burns away the masks, the titles, the performances, until only authenticity remains. Some people cannot handle that kind of exposure. They mistake the death of their illusion for the death of their worth. They don't realize you weren't attacking them. You were simply being real. But make no mistake, authenticity has consequences. When you live it, you will lose fake peace, fake relationships, fake hierarchies. Because realness has a cost. It dismantles everything that depends on illusion, but the reward, you gain an unshakable kind of authority, the kind no one can give or take. So when someone accuses you of ruining their image, remember, you didn't ruin it. You just stopped participating in its maintenance. You stopped pretending that power means superiority, that respect means fear, that credibility means control. You simply became truth in motion, and that's what stripped them, not you. The moment truth walks in, illusion becomes naked. Authority without integrity collapses. Respect without authenticity disintegrates. Dignity without humility evaporates. And power without truth turns to dust. So don't apologize for the light you carry. Don't feel guilty for how your presence exposes what's false. Because you were never meant to protect illusion, you were meant to illuminate reality. And if that truth dismantled someone's false power, it's only because they built it in the dark. You didn't strip them, you simply stood in truth long enough for their mask to fall, and that is the real power they could never understand. There's a hidden economy in human society, an invisible trade of perception. People rise not always because of what they truly are, but because of what others believe they are. Reputation becomes currency, appearance becomes armor, and perception becomes the fragile scaffolding that holds up their authority. But the moment truth walks into the room, everything changes. Because truth doesn't buy into perception, it demands substance. And when substance is missing, power built on appearances begins to rot in real time. You see, perception is the counterfeit of truth. It's convincing, polished, even hypnotic, but it's hollow. It depends entirely on others' belief, not on inner reality. It's the kind of power that must be constantly maintained, through image, through words, through control of narrative. Yet truth is indifferent to narrative. It doesn't care who looks good or bad, it simply is. And that's why those who build their authority on perception fear people like you, because your authenticity doesn't play by their rules. When someone's power is constructed on perception, it means their worth exists only as long as others don't question it. Their authority stands as long as people accept their illusion. But when you show up embodying truth, raw, unapologetic truth, you pull the curtain back. You don't even need to accuse them. Your mere presence starts revealing what's real. Their voice trembles. Their words lose conviction. Their composure cracks not because you humiliated them, but because their entire power structure was built on being believed, not on being true. This is the exact moment when false power begins to panic. Because truth doesn't shout, it exposes. It doesn't fight, it reveals. It doesn't need validation, it creates it. And that terrifies those whose identity is held together by how others see them. They suddenly realize their influence has no foundation, their control has no depth, their charisma has no integrity. It's all scaffolding built around emptiness, and the presence of truth makes that emptiness impossible to hide. That's why perception-based power must always silence truth. It has to, because truth threatens its survival. Truth is like sunlight to mold, it doesn't argue with it. It simply makes it impossible to exist. And when you embody truth through clarity, consistency, and integrity, you become that sunlight. You didn't set out to expose anyone, yet your existence does. You don't play their game, yet somehow you win by refusing to play. The frightening thing for those built on perception is that truth doesn't even need to try. A single authentic person can destabilize an entire structure of false authority just by showing up. Because authenticity radiates something perception never can, certainty. It's a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to dominate or persuade. It simply knows, and that knowing, that groundedness is what others unconsciously recognize as real power. The irony is painful. Those who spent their lives crafting their image eventually lose everything to someone who never tried to impress anyone. Because genuine power isn't performative, it's transformative. It doesn't need to convince, it compels. It doesn't demand submission, it invites respect. It doesn't manipulate perception, it changes it. When truth enters, perception loses its audience. People start to see what they were blind to. The charismatic mask begins to look forced. The exaggerated confidence feels hollow. The carefully constructed superiority starts to look like desperation. That's the moment perception-based power realizes it was never powerful at all. It was only believed to be. And once truth has been seen, perception can never fully recover, You can't unsee authenticity, you can't unfeel integrity. Once you've witnessed the difference between real and fake strength, the illusion of control becomes embarrassing to watch. And that's why people who rely on perception will often try to destroy truth bearers, not because they hate you, but because they can't survive next to you. But you must remember, this isn't a battle between people, it's a battle between truth and appearance. Between substance and shadow, between reality and performance, and truth always wins in the end, even if it's uncomfortable. Because perception fades the moment belief fades, but truth endures even when no one's watching. So when their perception-based power crumbles around you, don't mistake it for cruelty or pride. You didn't break their authority, you revealed its foundation. You didn't ruin their reputation, you removed the illusion that built it. You simply existed authentically, and that was enough to shift the entire balance of power. Remember this: perception-built authority is temporary because it's external. Truth-based power is eternal because it's internal. One demands constant maintenance, the other sustains itself. One collapses under scrutiny, the other grows stronger through it. So keep embodying truth even when it shakes the room. Let perception tremble, because when all illusions fall away, the only thing left standing is the one who never needed to pretend. Approval, it sounds harmless, even human. Everyone wants to be accepted, seen, understood. But beneath that natural desire hides one of the greatest mechanisms of control ever invented. Approval is the invisible leash of society. It trains you to trade your freedom for validation, your voice for acceptance, your power for belonging. And the people who depend on your submission know this well. They don't need to chain you, they just need to convince you that rejection means failure. They don't need to dominate you physically, they only need to make you fear disapproval. But everything changes the moment you wake up. The moment you realize that needing approval is a psychological contract you never signed. When you stop chasing it, you cut the invisible wires that let others pull your strings. You start speaking differently, walking differently, thinking independently, and that's when the structure built around your obedience begins to collapse. Because your compliance wasn't just an act, it was a cornerstone. It upheld their authority. It made their control appear natural. Once you remove your willingness to please, their influence begins to decay. People who live off others' submission cannot survive around those who no longer seek approval. Their identity feeds on your deference. They need you to look up to them so they can look down on you. They need your silence so their voice sounds important. They need your agreement so their ideas seem intelligent. But when you detach from that game, when you stop needing to be liked or accepted, their power source dries up. You become immune to their manipulation. And that immunity terrifies them. They start calling you rebellious, arrogant, ungrateful. They try to shame you back into obedience. Why? Because they sense that without your approval, seeking behavior, their illusion of superiority disintegrates. They realize they were never powerful, just obeyed. They were never respected, just feared. They were never wise, just unchallenged. And you, by refusing to bow, became the mirror that reflected that truth back to them. Understand this deeply. People's control over you ends where your need for their approval ends. Every manipulator, every false leader, every self-proclaimed authority survives on one thing: your emotional dependence. As long as you crave their validation, they can steer your behavior with a single disapproving look. But once you stop caring whether they clap or criticize, you become untouchable. You move beyond their reach. And here's the paradox: the moment you stop seeking approval is also the moment you start gaining real respect. Because people might not admit it, but they instinctively admire independence. They fear it, yes, but they also recognize its strength. When you no longer bend to please anyone, you emit a different frequency, one that says, "I exist without your permission." And that energy doesn't just command attention, it redefines power. But make no mistake, detaching from approval isn't arrogance, it's clarity. It's the realization that you were never meant to live in emotional servitude. That your value isn't a negotiation, that your worth isn't a vote. The approval you thought you needed was never real. It was just a tool people used to measure how obedient you were. The truth is, when you stop seeking approval, you stop living reactively. You stop bending every choice through the filter of will they like me, or will they judge me. You start acting from conviction, not fear, from purpose, not insecurity, and that shift is what destroys false hierarchies. Because control doesn't work on people who no longer need permission to exist, the boss loses power. The manipulative friend loses leverage, the emotional abuser loses influence. They can yell guilt, withdraw, or shame, but it no longer lands. You've withdrawn your emotional currency, and they can't buy control anymore. This is why your detachment feels so dangerous to them. You didn't just disobey, you became unpredictable. They can't calculate your next move because it's no longer based on their opinion. And unpredictability is the death of manipulation. When you stop caring whether you're liked, you start living as if you're free. And freedom is the one thing control cannot coexist with. So when people say, you've changed, what they really mean is, you've stopped submitting. When they say, you're not the same anymore, what they're really confessing is, you're no longer feeding my need for control. That's why they crumble. Not because you hurt them, but because your independence exposed the fragility of their dominance. Let them call you cold. Let them call you difficult. Let them say you've become distant. Because beneath their accusations is a silent truth. They miss the version of you who needed them. They miss the version they could shape, manipulate, and manage. But that version is gone, and in its place stands someone who doesn't ask to be seen. They simply are. When you stop seeking approval, you stop living as an actor in someone else's script. You become the writer of your own. And that's when the old order collapses quietly, inevitably, because it depended on your submission. They don't fall because you rebelled, they fall because you woke up. Respect, it's a word that sounds noble, almost sacred. But most people have never truly given it, they've only traded it. What they call respect is often just silent fear disguised as politeness, or admiration wrapped in dependency. They respect those who can reward or punish them. They respect status, not substance, titles, not truth. And when someone like you awakens, when you begin to see through that illusion, their so-called respect begins to rot in the light of your awareness. Because the moment you awaken, you expose how conditional their respect always was. Real respect doesn't depend on hierarchy, it depends on authenticity. But most of what passes for respect in this world is submission in costume. You were taught that to be respectful means to stay small, stay agreeable, stay silent in the presence of authority. That's not respect, that's suppression, and you can feel the difference the moment you awaken. You begin to sense how people's politeness isn't honor, it's strategy. They flatter the strong and ignore the genuine. They praise what's popular, not what's true. But when you awaken, when you step into your full self, not with arrogance, but with clarity, you become impossible to manipulate through this counterfeit respect. You no longer need approval to validate your worth. You no longer feel inferior around titles or intimidated by prestige. And that's when they begin to lose something they never truly had: your belief in their superiority. See, people don't actually give you respect. They only mirror how much you've surrendered your own. The less you think for yourself, the more they admire you. The quieter you stay, the more they like you. The more obedient you are, the more respect you receive. It's a transaction built on imbalance. But when you awaken, when you start speaking from truth rather than fear, that entire exchange collapses. You stop trading your authenticity for validation, and they feel that loss like an earthquake. because what they called respect was never love, it was leverage. And leverage can't exist without submission. When you awaken, they can no longer manipulate your emotions with praise or punish you with withdrawal. You no longer play the approval game that kept them comfortable. Your energy changes, you look them in the eye differently. Your silence carries a new kind of gravity. You're not impressed anymore, not because you've become prideful, but because you've become perceptive. You can see through the performance. You can hear the hollowness in their words. You can sense the insecurity behind their authority. That's when they begin to lose respect, not in your eyes but in their own. Because when truth appears, everything false becomes self-conscious. The mask that once earned them admiration starts to feel heavy. Their charm feels rehearsed. Their power feels borrowed. And they know you can see it. They know the illusion has lost its grip. And so they retreat, gossip, criticize, or try to undermine you, because your awakening has forced them to confront their own emptiness. But understand this, their loss of respect for you is not a tragedy, it's confirmation. It means your awakening worked. It means you stopped feeding a system of false reverence. It means you no longer participate in the lie that someone else's approval defines your value. Because true respect isn't handed down from others, it's born within. It's the natural byproduct of integrity, of living in alignment with truth, no matter who disapproves. When you awaken, your self-respect rises, and that self-respect is what makes false respect disappear. You start moving differently. You don't explain as much. You don't chase recognition. You don't shrink to fit in. You simply are, and those who were comfortable with your lesser version start feeling threatened by your wholeness. They interpret your calm as arrogance, your boundaries as disrespect, your independence as rebellion. But it's none of those things. It's liberation, and liberation is always misread by the enslaved. The people who truly understand respect will never be intimidated by your awakening. They will honor it because real respect recognizes truth in another and celebrates it. It doesn't compete. It doesn't control. It doesn't need you to stay small. Real respect grows stronger when met with authenticity, not weaker. So, when others begin to lose respect for you after you awaken, don't mourn it, analyze it. Their respect was conditional on your compliance. Their loyalty was tied to your silence. Their comfort depended on your blindness. You simply broke the terms of their unspoken agreement. You stopped pretending they were what they wanted you to believe. You didn't lose their respect. They lost access to your obedience. They lost the illusion that you needed their approval to exist. They lost the comfort of your conformity, and in truth, that's the greatest form of freedom there is. Because real respect doesn't come from how people see you. It comes from how you stand when the entire world tries to make you kneel. There is a moment, quiet, invisible, yet earth-shaking, when you begin to reclaim your dignity. It doesn't happen through revenge or shouting or proving anything. It happens when you finally stop allowing the world to define your worth, when you stop seeking permission to exist as you are, when you no longer kneel to appearances, approval, or fear. That is the moment you begin to restore your dignity, and that restoration sends tremors through every system, every person, every dynamic that depended on your self-doubt. Because dignity is not given, it is remembered. It is the sacred weight of knowing who you are, even when others forget. And the moment you stand in that awareness, you unintentionally expose how artificial the world's version of dignity has always been. The kind of dignity people wear like a costume, one that depends on titles, status, reputation, or image, starts to look fragile next to your quiet authenticity. You see, artificial dignity is performance-based. It exists only under stage lights, when eyes are watching, when approval is flowing, when the mask is firmly in place. But the dignity that's real can stand in the dark. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need validation. It simply exists, rooted, calm, unmovable. When you begin to live from that place, people who built their identity on appearance start to tremble. Because your existence becomes a mirror, and that mirror doesn't lie. You didn't mean to challenge them. You didn't even speak, but your peace started to reveal their pretense. Your self-control exposed their insecurity. Your humility made their arrogance obvious, and your authenticity made their performance unbearable. That's the paradox of true dignity. It doesn't need to expose anyone, yet it naturally reveals everything false. The moment you reclaim your inner worth, you stop feeding the illusions others rely on to feel superior. People with artificial dignity often behave like kings without kingdoms. They command respect through intimidation, not integrity. They walk with pride, but it's hollow. They mistake control for confidence and image for honor. Their dignity depends entirely on how well others believe their act. But when you step into your true dignity, the kind that comes from self-respect, truth, and inner wholeness, their borrowed authority disintegrates. Because you're no longer impressed by their titles, nor threatened by their posturing, you see through it. And seeing through illusion is the most dangerous act of all. This is why some people become hostile when you rise in self-respect. They sense it immediately, the shift in your energy. You stop reacting to their condescension. You stop flinching at their disapproval. You start speaking with a quiet confidence that doesn't need to prove anything, and that calm drives them mad because it exposes the weakness of their own foundation. You are what they pretend to be. You embody the strength they claim to possess. When you restore your dignity, you no longer need to fight for recognition. Your presence speaks for itself. You don't argue to be heard. Your silence carries authority. You don't chase validation. Your integrity commands it. And people who built their power on spectacle cannot survive that contrast, because when real dignity enters the room, all imitation feels cheap. The truth is, the world rewards artificial dignity, the polished mask, the strategic smile, the rehearsed humility. But none of it can withstand someone who's truly at peace with themselves. Your inner dignity dismantles false hierarchies without a single word. It makes manipulation impossible. It makes envy pointless. It makes intimidation laughable. Because what can they take from someone who has already reclaimed their worth? You see, dignity is not pride. Pride is fragile. Dignity is eternal. Pride needs witnesses. Dignity needs only truth. Pride shouts to be seen. Dignity stands silently, unshaken. And that difference terrifies those whose entire existence depends on external recognition. When they meet someone whose sense of self cannot be inflated or deflated by opinions, they panic, because they can no longer control what they cannot define. And so they'll say you've changed, they'll whisper that you've become distant, but the truth is, you simply stopped kneeling. You stopped apologizing for your strength. You stopped letting guilt masquerade as humility. You stopped letting others write your worth in temporary ink. You remembered that dignity was never something to be earned. It was something to be reclaimed. And in reclaiming it, you expose the great illusion of the world, that dignity comes from being admired. It doesn't. It comes from being unshaken, from knowing who you are when no one claps, from walking with grace after being disrespected, from standing tall after being doubted, from forgiving without losing self-respect. That is real dignity, the kind that can't be bought, borrowed, or broken. So, when your dignity rises, don't apologize for the discomfort it causes. That discomfort is the sound of false dignity collapsing. It's the sound of illusion gasping for air. Let it fall, let it crumble, because when all pretense is gone, what remains is truth, and truth needs no performance. You didn't set out to expose anyone. You simply remembered who you are, and in doing so, you revealed who they never were. That's what happens when real dignity returns. The artificial has no choice but to fade.